Good morning, welcome to The Big Questions. I'm Nicky Campbell. 57% of single mothers of young children have never been married or lived with a man. From sink-estate teenagers to middle-aged career women, raising a child without a father has never been so popular. Our first big question this morning: do children need fathers? This psychologist says it's the quality of love that matters, not who gives it. The gap between rich and poor is wider than ever, yet while the government has fallen short of its target to halve child poverty by 2010, some bankers are still pocketing six-figure bonuses. Our next big question: is it time for a maximum wage? And a woman alleging rape has her identity protected by law. The man she accuses is named and shamed, but 40% of those in the dock for rape are not convicted. Our last big question: should those accused of rape be granted anonymity? This rape victim says only those found guilty should be named. We're in Newcastle at Excelsior Academy. Delighted to be here with a very lively local audience. Sitting for us on high in the very comfortable seats this morning, we have got for you the director of the religious think tank Ecclesia, Jonathan Bartley, the headmaster of Stonyhurst, the Jesuit boarding school, Andrew Johnson, and the journalist and feminist writer, Beatrix Campbell. Now, if you're a fan of the Archers, you'll know that the staid and sensible Helen is planning to have a baby without a father. Yes, it has even reached the Archers. In real life, too, it's a choice more women are making. Do children need fathers? Alex Borchardt, from Families Need Fathers. I think we know where you're coming from here. What is it specifically that is so important about the masculine role in bringing up a child?
I think both parents have a very important role to play in the child's life, and the mother and the father play very different parts in the upbringing. I think on the one hand, every child, every person has a real fascination for their identity, where they come from, and to deny a child the right of knowing who his or her father is, I think is very unfair. I think, without wanting to stereotype, fathers might be good for sports, outdoor activities, and a lot of interests that perhaps the mother doesn't have.
What are the social consequences of so many children now not being in contact with their fathers and not having fathers when they're being brought up?
Well, on the one hand, there are, I think, close to 2 million single-parent families, mostly single mothers, and there are a great many children that grow up to have perfectly successful and happy lives who never have seen their father. But I think there are very widespread consequences when children are growing up without any kind of male role model. And it's very important for a child to have that balance of a mother and a father, or a father figure, perhaps a stepfather, if the father isn't around, in part of his upbringing.
Andrew Johnson, very much agreeing with that, I can see. Why is that?
Just to pick up on the point about role models, that's the key, really, isn't it? Children need love, they need stability, and they need good role models, both men and women, father and mother.
There are an awful lot of feckless fathers around, though, aren't there?
Yes, there are, but the fact of the matter is there are more good fathers than bad fathers, and it's important that men should have an input into rearing children, because there are men and women in society, and therefore it's important that the male input should be there just as much as the female input. We want our children to grow up to be balanced, well-rounded and mature, and men and women have a part to play in that.
Beatrix Campbell, this is the ideal, a mummy and a daddy, isn't it?
The ideal is that children should be loved and adored by the people who bring them into the world. They shouldn't be abandoned, they shouldn't be abused, they shouldn't be hurt. And that those adults and children live in a society that believes that this is a relationship worth having. Now, you know, when I was brought up, fathers spent, apparently, according to the statistics, around about 11 minutes a day with their children. Fathers in the most affluent and happy era of Walton-type family life in the 1950s, 11 minutes a day. Fathers were visitors to their families. There wasn't a debate going on then about, do children need fathers? Of course we did. But actually, we'd constructed a society in which fathers were expected to be providers, not parents. We now live in a society where the average father fathers better, children are better fathered than they've ever been, ever. They're probably better parented, they're better mothered than children have ever been. On the planet, I should think. So what is this conversation really about? Should it be about How about we change the length of the working week so that fathers are not, in Britain, working, especially when they're young, the longest hours in Europe and have the most starved relationship.
But when it comes to,
with their children.
I appreciate this part, when it comes to psychological input and that balance that we've addressed, can two women be better than a man and a
All the
woman?
research tells us that children brought up in households with lesbian parents are as well parented as children brought up in households where there's a man and a woman. So the debate really is about children being well parented.
Ray Barry.
Well, I would take issue with you beyond that. The data, the statistics, points to the best predictor of positive outcomes for children being brought up with married parents who live together. That doesn't deny the fact that some single parents, some lesbian couples might do a perfectly good, a superb job of raising children. But I think this just disguises the fact that we've had a model of family since time immemorial, which in this generation, for no obvious reason, we're dismantling. And the data...
It hasn't been since time immemorial. Actually, the shape of the family has changed dramatically, actually, with every generation and with all sorts of different political systems.
Are we
You're
dismantling?
assuming a family form of a man and a woman and 2.4 children that actually has been briefly a feature of 20th century Britain.
Well,
it's rather different in Sweden, and it was very different 100 years earlier.
I don't know where that data would come from, but my understanding is that we've had families ever since anybody can remember, which comprised a mother, a father, and children.
But isn't that the ideal? It may have been here briefly, but isn't that the ideal, Jonathan
The
Bartley?
ideal is that it takes a village to raise a child, not two parents.
The reality is the reality is the prisons are full. Our prisons are full of fatherless children.
Our prisons are also full of men. And men are more likely to commit the crimes, they're more likely to abuse, and they're more likely to rape. But the point is, you know, the idea that's put forward that it's the married families that are happiest, it may be, but actually that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The nuclear family is part of the problem, where we heap all this pressure on just two adults within an assuming society where they've got to work, they've got to bring up children, they've got to meet all these expectations, and most of them fall apart under all this pressure. What parents really need is a supportive community around them. You need as many fathers as possible, as many mothers as possible, bringing up those children in a communal context. And the emphasis on this narrow nuclear family is part of the problem, and it's actually going to lead to the family's disintegration rather than actually improving it.
Alex Borchard.
Can I just pick on one thing there? It's well known that prisons are overcrowded. People are having to be let out early. There isn't room for people. 80% of the prison population come from broken families. That can't be a coincidence.
Well, and let me tell you this, 100,000 children a year now, as we speak, are the children of somebody in prison. We lock up twice as many people now as we did 10 years ago. We are producing a situation where this mass incarceration, 80,000 people, mostly young men, locked up, who have children, and many of those young men...
No male role model. Is that not the problem
they're
for them?
saturated by role models, but they're useless role models, and they're the wrong role models, and they're violent and intemperate role models.
They need to be good role models, don't they? And I think the point that Jonathan makes about the village is right. And in the village there are men and there are women, and they each have a role to play in rearing the children.
So you chose, didn't you, to be a single mother because it was better no father for your daughter Hannah than a bad one.
I chose to be a single parent. We were unhappy, and our unhappiness was having an effect on Hannah, and I decided it was better to raise her by myself than for her father to be around.
But there have been some quite interesting developmental studies done about the importance of that male role throughout life, in the early stage, in the slightly older stage, in the teenage years. Has she missed out on all that?
Of course she's missed out on somebody else being in her life, somebody she can refer to, this role model of her father. He has been in touch with her, she does speak with him on a regular basis. But in terms of the extra hug, the extra cuddle, she's missed out on that, and she's missed out on his perspective on life.
I think that's a very important point. Every family is different, every situation is different, and many children do thrive when they've just got that single parent. But a quarter of children in this country are growing up in two households, and I think looking at it from a child's perspective, I had a lovely morning yesterday with my son, and we went bowling, we played chess, and this subject of this programme came up in the afternoon. And he said, no, children don't need fathers. Thanks, Ted. But I would like to think that he's not being too serious there, and I think when any adult looks back on their childhood, they'll tend to be very glad that they did have both parents involved, or sad if fate played a cruel part in taking the father away if the father's died, for instance. Sometimes it can't be resolved.
But Kirsty, isn't this the case, as a clinical psychologist, is this not, as some would argue, this is what nature intended, a man and a woman to bringing up the child? Some would say this is what God intended.
It's not what I would say. I would say that parenting is about being consistent and predictable and offering nurturance. And it can be one mother, it could be two ladies, it could be two men, it could be the grandmother. That's the most important thing. Here it has to be in the best interest of the child. And what isn't in the best interest of the child is a man in their lives that is inconsistent, perhaps they're separated, they're not keeping to the contact plans that have been set. And that detracts from all of the good stability that that child might have with their mother, or vice versa, they may be living with the father. And the mother is the one that's inconsistent, actually detracts and affects that child's attachment process. And what happens then is as the child grows up, they then parent in a very similar fashion, and it goes on and on.
Yeah,
those children who are brought up in an intact family with their mother and father, we've had some talk about a village raising a child, about needing
well, after
wider
separation,
adult modules.
38% of fathers lose contact with their children.
And when that happens, they also lose contact with half of their family. They lose contact with the paternal side of their family as well. This is where the village gets lost. This is where the child's experience of adults becomes very, very, very narrow. Yeah. And this is clearly not... I mean, I think we need to come back to this point that look at the data. And on whatever individual experiences might be, the fact is that children being brought up by their natural parents living together is the strongest predictor that they will be happy, rounded, fulfilled, achieving adults.
Yeah. Certainly my point of view would be good parents are happy parents, and whether you live in the same home or separate homes is almost irrelevant. I certainly know people, and I'm sure all of us do, who live together and are terribly unhappy, and the children suffer as a result of that. So surely it's in a child's interest to be in a happy home, irrespective of whether the father and the mother live under the same roof.
I mean, there's always this that anyone can point to a situation where there's an unhappy mother and father, and this clearly isn't beneficial. But that doesn't argue for saying all forms of family are equally good, because they're not. A mother and father who work together at loving each other and creating a loving home for their children.
It's the best form of family, is it?
Best form of family. That's where children are happiest.
What's so special about these men who play football and chess with their children? I don't get it. I think that I'd be more interested in what you're saying if you could show us that what these fathers want to do is wash underpants, put on the dinner, get up at night, do nappies, all of that stuff that is really the privileged work of care. I think that's the thing that we really need to be talking about. And once you fill in the detail...
What are the advantages then of lesbian parents to women parents? Are there specific, if I can say, advantages to that situation over and above the traditional?
I shouldn't think so. I think that, you know, some of the disadvantages will be that those women and those children have to navigate a society that puts all sorts of obstacles in their way. The benefit of it will be that they acquire a kind of stamina.
What do you mean by a kind of stamina?
Well, because you have to have a certain courage to do this. And to pull it off well means that you've got real resources, and for the children that's terrific, and for you, if that's what you are, that's terrific. I think we're long past that argument, frankly. The argument that we ought to be having is, what does it take to get the majority of men to be enabled to be good fathers? I have to assume, being an optimist, that most men want to be good fathers.
Alex.
But
I think some very good points there. I've certainly done my fair share of getting up in the middle of the night, changing nappies. That used to be just the mother's role, no longer the case. A good friend of mine does believe that if a child is getting love, it doesn't matter where that comes from. And for many years, she and her parents were the sole people that did the upbringing. But I think it's about balance. I think it's giving children male and female role models, as I said earlier. Same-sex relationships.
Is it the right natural order of things?
as I said, every family is different. I think we shouldn't be prescriptive and make judgments on other families. Same-sex relationships can work. Lesbian mothers do a very good job of bringing up their children, but I still think it's important to, if possible, have an uncle or some kind of male figure involved.
But what we mustn't do is get ourselves to a situation where we're undermining the nuclear family by the messages that we're sending out. That's the point, isn't it?
How might that happen? If you say to men, you're merely sperm machines, then they will behave just in such a way.
Exactly.
And we'll get more men like the one who was reported on this week, this Keith MacDonald from Sunderland, who had 8 children by 8 women, and he was clearly a feckless father, and he clearly, according to the newspaper reports, he wouldn't even have known who his children were he had to have been sat in front of them. So those are the sort of, that's the danger of a negative message, is it?
Exactly, and the point is that those are the exceptions, and we mustn't send out messages based upon the exceptions. What we need to do is to support, more than ever, good parenting which involves both men and women.
Justin, you grew up with no father. What did you feel you missed out on?
I like to talk about the balance that you mentioned, the conditioning that you mentioned as well. This is our society. You talk about conditioning. Is it not conditioned? Should we not move towards where fathers should play much stronger roles and should be considered just as important? Because what I felt that I missed was a balance emotionally. Seeing 2 people as children who loved each other, what you could learn from that growing up, I think was a very important thing that I missed out a little bit. But I must say I had an amazing mother, and I'm stronger for that. So.
Yeah, I mean, surely that's the thing that ultimately matters. Yeah, Wayne.
I'm a father of 2 young children, a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old, and out of the blue, the other day, my 5-year-old said, "Dad, can you take me camping?" He's obviously heard this at school. And I went, yes, and it's not being sexist. Some women will go camping with their children. I think my wife would prefer to stay at home in the warmth, but we're going to be in the garden, out in the cold, eating a pot noodle. I mean, that's fact, and he's looking to me for that support and something to do. I don't care whether it's gay, lesbian couples, as long as that child is loved and learns from that good standards and respect. That's all that matters.
Ray Barry?
He asked a few moments ago about what do we need to do in order to enable men to be good fathers. And I think the first thing we need to do...
Good parents.
Good parents, OK.
Well, what's wrong with the word father?
What do we need to do?
I think there's an obsession with some idea of a necessary masculine role model. What is it that's any use? I think that the thing that's really, really vital actually is what this young man over there said something that I thought was really, really wise. He said 2 things that were really, really wise. One was, thank goodness for him, he had a strong mother who he loves and feels that he is the beneficiary of. The thing that he feels he missed was witnessing adults able to love each other. Now, he put that, I think, elegantly and beautifully. He didn't witness at home 2 adults who loved each other in the course of having him.